Hi everyone, this is Holly Gage, continuing my Breaking the Ice series with kiln firing, fine silver, 950 and 960 silver clay. So let's meet the kiln. Hi everybody. Get people starting to use that kiln. Let's talk first about what your kiln can do that your torch can't do. It can do bigger and more complex items like that. Something dimensional and bigger. That's not finished yet, but that definitely came out of a kiln. There's no size limitations, and you can do hollow forms, you can do complex construction, and you don't have to keep it to 25 grams. Metal clay starts out being this gray color. Then once you fire it, it has this kiln white color. And what that is unpolished silver. So once you polish it, then it starts to get shiny. Let's talk about your setup, your safety. So I always have a spatula to get my pieces out of the kiln, or long-handled tweezers. I have leather gloves. And you don't necessarily need safety glasses unless you're doing enamel in your kiln where you're opening it up and it's that fire reg. But you do want about 12 inches away from anything. Now I always have a metal plate in front of my kiln, and that enables me to take something out of the kiln and have something to put it on. However, I never put something in front of the controller. Did that once and found out that can be problematic, and I ruined my controller. So instead of putting it out here, I would put it on the side here. So let's talk about some of the kiln furniture that you might need. I like to put stilts of some sort at the bottom of my kiln, and then I would either put a fiber board on top, a bowl on top, you could fill that with vermiculite, I'll talk about that later, or a ceramic kiln shelf. And you want air to circulate around your pieces, so that's why you want to lift it off the kiln. Now, the kiln shelf does not need to be treated. The fiber shelf I like because they last forever. The ceramic shelves last a long time as long as you let your kiln cool down, or sometimes they break from thermal shock. But I often put my bowl right on top of my stilts, filled with vermiculite, and then fire that. A lot of times people can't find these fiber bowls anymore, so you might want to get a ceramic bowl. Good ones that I find that are helpful are for glass slumping because they're made for the heat. What this is in the back of your kiln is your thermocoupler. And what that does is it gauges the temperature inside your chamber. And you don't want anything touching that. Then on top of your kiln, you have a hole with a plug. And usually I leave that in, but I take it out during the burnout stage of using wood clay or any combustible. In general, with my kiln, when I fire it, I'm not in the room. I get a headache, so that tells me, even though everybody says it's non-toxic and things like that, it tells me I shouldn't be in there, and I never fire with students in the room. I made this handy dandy chart in my other video for torch firing, but this was that piece. The original was 38 millimeters tall. When I fired it in the torch, it went to 33 millimeters tall. And when you fire it in a kiln, it shrinks even a little bit more. And the more it shrinks, the more dense the material. And that means you have a stronger piece. So in essence, the strongest pieces that you can get are done in a kiln. The next thing I want to talk about is your support materials. I have in here vermiculite, and that is a fine grain vermiculite. You can buy it at a garden store, and it's great to support dimensional items in it, or even flat items. The other support materials are aluminum hydrate, and that's dangerous. It's like a white powder, and when it gets in your lungs, it can be very toxic. There's also fiber blanket, very toxic. It's like fiberglass. You pull it apart, you breathe it. I only use vermiculite. If you want to see what the other two look like, I have a handout that I did that goes along with this that shows pictures of those items. But when I have something flat, what I do is I flatten out my vermiculite. I take my flat item and I just shimmy it in there. And it contours to the item just fine. But some people are like, well, why don't you just put it on the kiln shelf? Well, you can just put it on the kiln shelf. But if you have something big, there's something called drag. And what happens is when you put your item directly on the shelf and it's big or heavy, it might distort a little bit for when it's dragging, when it's shrinking, okay? And what happens is it might get distorted a little long-wise when it's shrinking. So what I like to do in that case is take some of my vermiculite, sprinkle it on my shelf, flatten it out, and that way my item has something to slide across the surface on. So that works out great. So what if you have a dimensional item? How do you support a piece like that? Well, I have a little lentil, and it's like pillowy. If I put it in the vermiculite like that, it might collapse. So what I'm going to do is put it in like that. So how I want to put my items in is where gravity is of the least resistance. So I will put it in straight up and down, shimmy it in there, and I might take some of my vermiculite and support some. I guess some could stick out, that's not a problem, but I want the whole thing supported really well. Something like the kitty, which was very dimensional, okay, big fat head, I would have put it down like this in the vermiculite and shimmied it into place. So that's how you support your items pretty well, and you avoid distortion. But sometimes gravity gets its way and distortion can be part of it, and you need to do a little with your nylon pliers or a bench and hammer. And what I usually do is put my piece between two layers of leather and then hit it strategically with a rubber mallet, a plastic mallet, or a rawhide mallet. So let's see how this kiln works anyway. Bye-bye piece. When you're doing your very first piece, do me a favor. Do something little. You're going to save yourself a lot of anxiety and stress. I'm going to suggest doing a teeny little earring. It'll come out, and if it doesn't come out, you can be like, oh, well, I'm testing my kiln. When we're turning on our kiln, you have to use the on and off switch. And then you get some funky numbers, and I can't even tell you what it means, but it's the kiln saying, Holly, be patient, I'm just getting ready. Never turn your kiln off in the middle of a cycle. Meaning when you're in the middle, when your kiln is fully on, you're going to turn it on and off with the start and stop button. You don't want to use this in the middle of a cycle because, again, you can ruin the controller. Ask me how I know. So anyway, this first button is the thing that selects the program. Now you might be saying to yourself, I don't have the same kiln as you. Well, a lot of the kilns work very similarly. So even if it doesn't have these exact functions, I think that you can figure out how to relate from this kiln to your kiln. When I push it, that's idle. That's just waiting for you to do something. It's sitting and waiting. And the 57 is supposed to be the temperature of my room. This kiln is reading the ambient temperature of the room. So if this number does not equal the temperature of your room, your kiln is off. Isn't that easy way to figure out if your kiln is the right temperature or not? That, of course, means you have to have an accurate temperature gauge in the room. This advances you to the next setting and also sets that setting. So first I'm going to press it, and I'm going to look for a program. Now, they have some preset programs, and then they have user-defined programs. So this advanced to me. Now I want to go and find a program, and I want to show you how to program your kiln. So I put it on 7, which is a user-defined. So once I pick my program, I'm going to set it. And it's going to advance to the next choice. This is your ramp. How fast you want your kiln to get to your target temperature. There are times you want to slow down that number. Sometimes when you have to do a 2-step firing, such as base metals. If I want to change that number, that makes it go down. The lower and higher makes it go up. And when you have full, it says to the kiln, ramp as fast as you can to my target temperature. Or if I lower the temperature, it will take an hour for it to get to whatever temperature you put in. And then after it gets to that temperature, it will go to your target temperature. So in other words, you're purposely slowing your kiln down, and a ramp is over an hour's period of time. So I'm going to go back to full. There we go. So this sets it and advances to the next choice. Now, I'm firing as high as I can for the strongest piece I can. I'm putting fine silver in there, and it goes for 1650. If I want to change that number, again, it's the up or down button. So I can go up, but if I do that, if I get to 1725, I will melt my piece. So this is a good temperature for sintering fine silver. Now I'm going to set that number. Now this is the hold time. How long do I want my kiln to hold that 1650? I chose 2 hours. I could choose less by hitting the down button. I could choose more by hitting the up button, but I'm going to set that. Now this is a second ramp. I don't want to do a second ramp, but some of the base metal clays need a second ramp. But since I don't, I'm hitting 0, 0, 0. And then I'm going to set that. This is when you can start. So this is the moment you're waiting for. So you hit the start button and it goes on. I wait for the click. That's what my kiln does. There we go. It's not until after it actually starts the program that you can check that you did the right thing. And I do this all the time out of paranoia that I put the wrong temperature in. Okay, so this lower button, once it starts, doubles as a review button. So it's program 7, ramp, full ramp, temperature 1650, holding for 2 hours, and now it's 59 degrees in there. But by the time it raises its temperature to the 1650, it's usually about 3 hours. So let's say I want to stop the program. Absolutely do not use that button. Use this button. And it will say stop. You don't want to turn it off in the middle of setting it because that just messes everything up. What temperature can you take it out at? Usually I wait till it gets to about 200. So I would handle this with tweezers. And you could cool it off real quickly by putting in some water, or you could just set it on the side here and let it air cool. But you don't want to pull anything out that has inclusions. Like let's say you have glass in it or a gem in it or things like that. You want to let it pretty much cool down and then take it out. So being impatient is really not a benefit in this instance. Is it ever a benefit? Really? I'd like to see you try your kiln out because we're breaking the ice. We're not going to be intimidated by this. This is our friend. It does a nice job. I've had mine for, since I started. So it's like almost 20 years that I've had this baby. It's a workhorse. Read the accompanying handout, which has a lot more information, but I want to demonstrate actually using the buttons and advancing this. You can find the handout on hollygage.com in the tutorial section. I will also have it in my blog section. So let's go making something. Fire and hot.